In the vast tapestry of history that weaves together the continents of Europe and the Americas, few threads are as enduring and pervasive as the role of the Catholic Church in shaping the daily lives of people in traditional Latin America. From the moment Christopher Columbus planted his flag on Hispaniola in 1492, accompanied by friars eager to spread the gospel, the Church became an inseparable companion to conquest and colonization. It wasn't just a spiritual institution, it was the architect of social order, the educator of the masses, the healer of the sick, and sometimes, in a wry twist of fate, the unwitting agent of profound cultural transformations. Imagine a world where the tolling of church bells dictated the rhythm of your day, from dawn prayers to evening vespers, and where forgetting to cross yourself before a meal might earn you a stern glance from your neighbors, or worse, a visit from the local inquisitor. This was the reality for millions in colonial Latin America, a region stretching from Mexico to Argentina, where the Church's influence was as omnipresent as the tropical sun, though occasionally casting long shadows of control and coercion. The arrival of the Spanish and Portuguese in the New World was not merely a military endeavor. It was a holy mission sanctioned by papal bulls like the Interquitera of 1493, which divided the unexplored lands between the two Iberian powers with the explicit goal of converting indigenous souls to Christianity. The conquistadors, those swashbuckling adventurers with swords in one hand and crucifixes in the other, were often flanked by missionaries from orders such as the Franciscans, Jesuits, and Dominicans. These friars saw the Americas as a fertile ground for evangelism, a chance to recreate a pious society free from the heresies plaguing Europe. In daily life, this meant that indigenous communities, who had their own rich spiritual traditions involving gods of nature, ancestor worship, and ritual sacrifices, suddenly found themselves thrust into a new religious paradigm. The Church's first order of business was conversion, often through mass baptisms that were as expedient as they were superficial. Picture thousands of Aztecs or Incas lining up in the plazas of newly conquered cities, sprinkled with holy water while friars chanted in Latin, a language as alien to them as the metal armor of the Spaniards. It was efficient, sure, but one can't help but chuckle at the irony. Many converts probably thought they were just getting a free bath. As colonial society took root, the Church embedded itself into the very fabric of everyday existence through the establishment of missions and parishes. In places like Mexico and Peru, the reduction system, essentially forced resettlement of indigenous peoples into organized towns centered around a church, restructured daily routines around Christian worship. Mornings began with the Angelus bell, calling families to prayer, while afternoons might involve catechism classes for children. The church calendar dominated the year, with feast days for saints interrupting agricultural labor, providing rare moments of respite and celebration. For the average peasant or laborer in the encomienda system, where indigenous workers were entrusted to Spanish landowners for protection and Christian instruction in exchange for tribute and labor, the local priest was both spiritual guide and overseer. He might bless the fields before planting season, ensuring a good harvest through divine intervention, or mediate disputes over land with a Bible in hand. It's almost amusing how the Church positioned itself as the ultimate middleman between God and the ground, collecting tithes, a tenth of all produce, as payment for its services, which funded grand cathedrals that towered over humble adobe homes. Education, a cornerstone of daily life for the young, was almost exclusively under ecclesiastical control in traditional Latin America. The Church viewed knowledge not just as a tool for worldly success but as a weapon against paganism. Missionary schools, often attached to convents or missions, taught indigenous children and mestizos, those of mixed European and indigenous ancestry, the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, all infused with heavy doses of Christian doctrine. In Mexico, for instance, Franciscan friars like Pedro de Ganti established schools where students learned European trades such as carpentry and blacksmithing alongside prayers and hymns. Girls, too, were educated in convents, learning needlework, music, and the virtues of modesty, preparing them for roles as wives and mothers in a patriarchal society reinforced by church teachings. But here's where a touch of historical humor creeps in. These schools sometimes used creative methods, like painting biblical scenes on walls or using theatrical performances to illustrate miracles, because who wouldn't remember the story of David and Goliath better if acted out with wooden swords? Yet, this education came at a cost. It often meant separating children from their families, leading to cultural erosion. For enslaved Africans brought to the colonies, the Church offered baptism as a path to minimal social integration, though it rarely challenged the institution of slavery itself, preferring to preach obedience and resignation as godly virtues. Health and welfare formed another pillar of the Church's daily involvement, blending compassion with control. In an era before modern medicine, monasteries and convents operated hospitals where friars and nuns provided care using herbal remedies, bloodletting, and prayers. The Hospital de Jesus in Mexico City, founded in the 16th century, treated the poor and indigenous alike, embodying the Church's charitable mission. Daily life for the ill might involve visits from priests administering last rites or nuns brewing teas from local plants. However, the irony, and a grim one at that, is that the very missions designed to save souls often accelerated physical demise. European diseases like smallpox ravaged indigenous populations concentrated in reductions, turning places of worship into inadvertent epicenters of epidemics. Survivors might find solace in church rituals, like processions carrying statues of saints believed to ward off plagues, fostering a communal spirit amid tragedy. In rural areas, the local curate doubled as a rudimentary doctor, dispensing advice on everything from childbirth to fevers, all while reminding patients that suffering was a path to salvation. It's as if the Church said, "We'll heal your body, but only if we can save your soul first," a bargain that shaped how people approached illness, blending faith with folk medicine. Economically, the Church was a powerhouse, influencing daily work and wealth distribution in ways that would make modern corporations envious. As one of the largest landowners in colonial Latin America, it controlled vast haciendas worked by indigenous laborers, producing crops like sugar and wheat that fueled transatlantic trade. Tithes ensured a steady income, collected with the zeal of a taxman, while bequests from the wealthy padded its coffers. For the average farmer, this meant setting aside portions of their harvest for the Church, a practice that integrated religious duty into agricultural cycles. Merchants in port cities like Lima or Cartagena might seek indulgences, payments for forgiveness of sins, to ease their consciences over shady deals, turning spirituality into a financial transaction. The Jesuits, in particular, ran efficient estates in Paraguay, where Guarani indigenous people lived in self-sustaining communities under church protection, blending evangelism with economic productivity. But let's add a light-hearted note. These missions were so well organized that they resembled early communist utopias, except with more rosaries and fewer revolutions. The Church's economic clout extended to banning usury among Catholics while engaging in lending itself, creating a monopoly on moral finance that affected everything from small loans for weddings to large investments in mining. Social life in traditional Latin America revolved around the Church like planets around the sun, with rituals marking every milestone. Birth began with baptism, often performed hastily to ensure the infant soul was safe from limbo, a concept that must have kept new parents up at night. Childhood involved First Communion, a rite of passage celebrated with family feasts, reinforcing community bonds. Courtship and marriage were strictly regulated. Couples needed priestly approval, and weddings were elaborate affairs blending European customs with local flavors, like incorporating indigenous dances. Daily interactions were laced with religious etiquette, greeting with Ave Maria, or crossing oneself when passing a church. For women, the Church offered limited avenues for agency, such as joining convents where they could pursue education or artistic endeavors, though most were confined to domestic roles extolled in sermons as divinely ordained. Enslaved people found in the Church a double-edged sword. It preached equality of souls but upheld hierarchies, yet African brotherhoods, cofradias, allowed them to organize socially, blending Catholic saints with Yoruba deities in secret. Festivals provided the colorful heartbeat of daily life, where the Church's influence turned solemn doctrine into joyous spectacle. Holy Week processions in cities like Seville-influenced Antigua, Guatemala featured elaborate floats carrying images of Christ, with participants whipping themselves in penance, a sight that's equal parts devotion and drama. Saints' days interrupted the monotony of labor, with markets, music, and fireworks transforming villages into carnivals. In Andean regions, the Feast of Corpus Christi merged with Inti Raymi, the Incan Sun Festival, creating syncretic celebrations where Catholic Eucharist met indigenous reverence for nature. These events weren't just fun. They reinforced social hierarchies, with elites sponsoring floats and the poor participating as penitents. Humorously, one might say the Church invented the original block party, complete with moral lessons hidden in the piñatas. The phenomenon of religious syncretism deserves special attention, as it illustrates how the Church's dominance in daily life was negotiated rather than absolute. In Mexico, the Virgin of Guadalupe emerged from Juan Diego's 1531 apparition, her image fusing Aztec symbolism, the moon under her feet echoing the goddess Coatlicue, with Catholic iconography. Indigenous people saw her as Tenantzin, their mother goddess, allowing them to preserve ancient beliefs under a Christian veneer. Daily prayers at home altars might include offerings of flowers and incense, blending pre-Columbian rituals with rosaries. In Brazil, African slaves adapted Catholicism to candomblé, equating saints with orishas, so a feast for Saint Barbara doubled as homage to the thunder god Shango. This blending affected everything from healing practices, using herbs blessed by priests, to funeral rites, where wakes combined Catholic vigils with indigenous mourning songs. The Church, ever vigilant, launched extirpation campaigns to root out idolatry, destroying huacas, sacred objects, and punishing practitioners, yet syncretism persisted, a quiet rebellion in plain sight. It's as if the people said, "Fine, we'll go to Mass, but we'll bring our gods along for the ride." Politically, the Church wielded immense power, often aligning with the crown through the patronato real, which gave monarchs control over ecclesiastical appointments. Priests served as local administrators, collecting census data and enforcing laws, making the pulpit a platform for propaganda. During times of unrest, like the Tupac Amaru rebellion in Peru, the Church sometimes sided with rebels preaching social justice, drawing from gospel teachings on the poor. In daily governance, confessors influenced viceroys' decisions, turning the confessional into a de facto council chamber. Yet, this power bred corruption. Scandals involving greedy friars hoarding wealth led to reforms, like the expulsion of Jesuits in 1767, disrupting communities reliant on their missions. As colonialism evolved into independence in the 19th century, the Church's role in daily life adapted but endured. In newly formed republics, it continued to shape education, with Catholic schools dominating until secular reforms. Family life remained anchored in church sacraments, with divorce rare and morality policed through sermons. In rural areas, the cura, priest, was the village elder, advising on everything from crop rotations to marital spats. Urban dwellers attended lavish masses in Baroque cathedrals, symbols of enduring faith. Even in politics, figures like Simón Bolívar navigated church alliances, recognizing its sway over the populace. The Church's influence extended to art and culture, permeating daily expressions. Colonial paintings depicted biblical scenes with indigenous faces, while music in churches blended Gregorian chants with local instruments like the charango. Literature, from Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz's poetry to folk tales, grappled with faith's complexities. Food, too, bore the Church's mark. Fasting during Lent led to creative dishes like capirotada, a bread pudding symbolizing Christ's body. In matters of gender and sexuality, the Church enforced norms that defined daily interactions. Women were idealized as Marian figures, pure and submissive, while men were exhorted to be protective providers. Convents offered escape for some, like the famous Mexican nun who wrote feminist critiques under the guise of theology. For LGBTQ individuals, though not openly discussed, the Church's condemnation shaped hidden lives, with confession offering anonymous solace. Economically post-independence, the Church faced challenges like land reforms that stripped its properties, yet it rebounded through charitable works. In the 20th century, as Latin America modernized, the Church evolved with liberation theology, addressing poverty in daily sermons and community programs. Priests like Oscar Romero in El Salvador became advocates for the oppressed, turning Mass into calls for justice. Yet, traditional elements persist. In Mexico, Day of the Dead altars blend Catholic All Souls Day with Aztec ancestor veneration, a family ritual involving food, photos, and candles. In Peru, Coiler Rit-I pilgrimage merges Inca star worship with Christian devotion. These practices show how the Church, once an imposer's tool, became a cultural anchor. The Church also influenced leisure and community. Cofradias organized dances and plays, fostering solidarity among marginalized groups. Sports, like early football in Argentina, sometimes started in parish yards. In health, church-run clinics continue traditional roles, blending modern medicine with spiritual healing. During epidemics, like historical smallpox outbreaks, priests led quarantines with prayers. Educationally, Catholic universities like the University of San Marcos in Lima, founded in 1551, set standards for learning, emphasizing ethics alongside sciences. Politically, the Church mediated conflicts, from colonial arbitrations to modern peace talks in Colombia. Culturally, festivals like Carnival in Brazil incorporate Lenten preparations with African rhythms, a syncretic explosion of joy before austerity. In family dynamics, the Church promoted large families, influencing demographics, with godparents, compadres, creating extended networks for support. Economically, ethical teachings on fair trade shaped markets, while microfinance programs echo historical almsgiving. Artistically, murals in churches tell stories of faith, inspiring daily reflections. In literature, authors like Gabriel Garcia Marquez weave magical realism with Catholic motifs, reflecting ingrained spirituality. Music, from villancicos at Christmas to mariachi at weddings, carries ecclesiastical echoes. Food traditions, like tamales on Candlemas, link meals to saints' days. In death, elaborate funerals with novenas ensure communal mourning, blending grief with hope. This enduring presence, from cradle to grave, highlights the Church's profound imprint on traditional Latin American life. It's a story of imposition and adaptation, control and comfort, where faith wasn't just believed, it was lived, day in and day out, with a resilience that's almost comical in its persistence. Even today, as secularism rises, the Church's legacy lingers in the crosses adorning necks, the bells ringing in plazas, and the quiet prayers whispered in moments of need.